which we use for everything. So we use this to measure promotion, we use it to analyze pricing. We know that if we're analyzing pricing, for example, which is a big chunk of what I do, pricing analytics, how much do you want to sell? So this is what we sell. There's your optimum price. There's finding the optimal price. The other is what happens if we lower price. Okay, well, if we lower price, you know, this is how much more you're going to sell. Or if you raise price, this is how much more how much less you're going to sell. So demand is kind of integral to what we're all about. In essence, in terms of quantitative marketing or marketing, 99% of it revolves around how it affects demand. So kind of getting an estimate, a sound estimate of the demand curve is important. All right, there's a max price, there's a quantity max, and again, these are just kind of extensions of this is the maximum we can sell at a zero price, and then that's the price at which demand goes to zero, that P-max. We don't normally worry too much about those endpoints, although I did do an example. I did have a situation once in which we observed a zero price, and I wanted to see if this point matched up with my demand curve. Because most of the time we're going to estimate that middle part, where the data is. Where prices and quantity are, we don't normally see these outer regions. But there was a time where I had an outlier. I had a point way out here, and it didn't make any sense until finally the client told me that they had 100% give, essentially 100% rebate at the cash register. So you grab a box of this, it was a software, grab a box of this software, go up to the cash register, they ring it up, and then they automatically give you the 100% rebate, so you got it for zero price. So what it allowed me to do is to see if my estimates, remember all we get to do is observe existing data. So we normally have all this, and that's where you get your regression line. But what it allowed me to do is see, okay, if I did extrapolate my regression, how accurate is this point here? And that's at that zero price. So what I was able to do was show that the demand curve was pretty accurate. Because on that zero giveaway, I think it was only over a weekend that it was a 100% rebate. That's about the quantity. It was pretty close to the quantity I would have estimated. It was within the margin of error. So, as theoretical as all these things sound, we do observe kind of these points. All right. And again, a lot of the time we're worried about movements along the demand curve, up and down, either price changes or quantity changes. And what we want to make sure we understand is what are the factors that go into these demand curves. So when we know the law of demand is higher prices, lower prices, higher quantity, but we also have those other factors, things that are held constant along the demand curve that we normally like to explicitly account for. So for demand, one of them is taste and preferences, for example. Taste and preferences can shift the demand curve, and it's hard to measure these things, and it's hard to account for these. But a more positive interpretation or more positive appreciation of a product can shift that out there. And essentially this is what marketing does. It's trying to affect taste and preferences. I like this product because I like the commercial. I want to buy more of it. And what does that allow? Well, it allows you to, for any specific price and quantity, it allows you to either raise the price, so I can charge, because you like my product more, I can charge more for that same quantity, or conversely, at the same price, I can sell more. Or some combination of the two, right? I can be in that middle part. But essentially, tastes and preferences are what we'll call a shifter. When tastes and preferences change, the demand curve is going to shift out. And marketing efforts, the whole purpose of marketing efforts is to try to affect people's tastes and preferences. So shift it out as well as to change the slope, I guess, also. Yeah, sideways effect. Famous paper, the sideways effect. We know that the demand for Merlot shifted back, resulting in less sales and lower prices. Demand for Pinot Noir shifted out, resulting in more sales and greater prices. And this is basically what I did in the sideways paper. I just said, look, if there was some sideways effect, we should observe two things. Less Merlot being sold, and then lower prices. And if there was a positive effect on Pinot Noir, we should see more Pinot Noir being sold and higher prices. And that's exactly what we saw in the data. Another common factor that we want to account for is income. Income is again a shifter. And the effect of income really depends. So let's say we have an increase in income. And the demand curve shifts out. That's going to be true of, well, again, we can either raise price or sell more. But that's going to be true of what's going to be called a normal good. So a normal good is defined solely with respect to income. A normal good is a good for which, as income increases, demand shifts out and we buy more. That's it. That's the sole definition of a normal good. The opposite's true. If income decreases, we're going to buy less. So if in a regression, for example, we have income in there, the coefficient's positive. If the coefficient's positive, it's a normal good. When income increases, demand shifts out. And when the coefficient's negative, it's an inferior good. So when income increases, we buy less. When income increases, we buy less of that good. And that would be the definition of an inferior good. So inferior goods, again, are defined as goods for which, as income increases, we buy less. So it's still an increase in income, it's just that we're going to buy less of this good. So this would be for things like generic beer, for example. Right? Income goes up, we buy less generic beer, and we probably switch to more branded beer. Lower priced wines. Our income increases, we buy less lower priced wines and better, higher priced wines. Better wines. And again, all we got to do is test the coefficient on income to see if, what the sign is, and then whether it's significant or not. Right? So ideally, these are all things we want to include in our regression. And again, here's a question. What do you think fast food is? Fast food a normal good or an inferior good?
Inferior?
Can it be both?
Turns out all fast foods are normal except for one.
Taco Bell.
Taco Bell, except for Taco Bell. So McDonald's, your income goes up. I'm going to go with McDonald's, yay. But your income goes up to Taco Bell, and you actually buy less Taco Bell. And I guess go to more McDonald's. So, Taco
Funny because I
Bell,
like Taco Bell.
that's what the data shows. So
I like Taco Bell.
again, inferior has nothing to do with the quality of the good, just kind of the perceived quality of the good. Price of related goods. And we got substitutes. And what happens, so an increase in the price of a substitute good. So let's see, the increase in the price of a substitute good. So let's put these out here. Gotta stop here. So here's quantity demanded. It is 0. beta 1. Price, so price isn't a shifter, right? Price isn't a shifter, price is our movement along the demand curve. Everything, everything else is a shifter. I should throw it. So we had tastes and preferences, which are hard to account for. So beta 2, let's call this some sort of advertising, right? Because advertising, the goal of advertising is to change tastes and preferences. So if we're looking at these coefficients, we know beta 1 is going to be negative, the law of demand. Beta 2 is going to be positive. It's the effect of advertising. So 3 income. Beta 3 could be either positive or negative. Beta 3 is positive if it's a normal good, and negative if it's an inferior good. Let's see. Price of a substitute. Beta 4. Let's call this price of a substitute. And put that, shoot, I'm running out of room. Put that over here. Beta 4. Let's see, the price of the substitute. So if the price of a substitute goes up, what happens to my demand? Does it shift out or back?
It increases.
It increases? Yeah, because the law of demand. So price of a substitute goes up, I buy less of the substitute and more of my good. So if the price of substitute goes up and I buy more of my good, that means this is positive. Yeah, for substitutes. Yeah. That makes sense? Price of the substitute goes up. Yeah, buy more of my good. And yeah, we got all that stuff. And for complements, let's see. That's beta 5, price of a complement. So beta 5, price of a complement. So I buy chips and dip, right? I like dip when I have my chips. So when the price of dip goes up, I buy less dip. And if I buy less dip, I'm buying less chips. So the sign will be,
Plus then?
it'll be negative, exactly. It'll be negative if they're complements. So that makes sense. And in a lot of data sets, we can include almost all of these things, right? We've got data on promotion, which is a form of advertising. We can get data on income, and for a lot of our data sets, we got the price of substitutes. Not always complements, but we normally have price of substitutes, and sometimes of complements if we get more robust data sets, which we might get. Okay, so they'll shift back. Number of buyers, that kind of makes sense. The more people there are, and sometimes we'll throw in population into these. So beta 6, we'll just put population. More people wanting the product, it's going to shift demand out. And the last one is 7, let's say price expected future price. And this has to do with what we expect the price to do in the future. So if we expect the price in the future to increase, what would happen to our demand today? Yeah, it would increase, right? So the price is going to go up on Friday. Today I'm going to go out and load up before the price goes up. My favorite example of this was, I think I showed you guys, this was gun sales and the spikes when 9/11, but this is when Obama was elected the first time. And people thought Obama was going to just take away everyone's guns, he was going to repeal the Second Amendment. So there was a run on guns. He didn't, but on his, I guess the thinking was that, okay, he was waiting just to get reelected, because when he gets reelected, then he's going to take away our guns. And we saw that even bigger spike. And what was the last one? What's that last spike? December 2015, what was going on in there? I don't remember what that is. Yeah, I don't remember what that is. But there's a spike there. All right, kind of basic stuff. We should try to include as many of these things as possible. We don't always have them. Tastes and preferences are hard, but we can measure it using advertising or promotion or something like that. Population is pretty easy. If you're looking at kind of bubbles in the population, like millennials, everyone's talking about that. We can pull this data out. We can pull income out. Expected future price, we usually don't worry too much about that unless there's some expected event. So, for example, in oil, the Middle East is a big deal. If there's any kind of unrest in the Middle East and the price of oil usually shoots up on the expectation that there's going to be some restriction of it somehow. But normally we want to include as many of these things as possible. But we, the data being limited, we don't normally include all of them. The other side of the market, supply, we think of supply curves as a minimum supply price, meaning for any given quantity, the minimum price I'm willing to sell this quantity is going to be P0. I'll take more than that, but I won't take less than that. So you can think of P0 as my cost. In fact, supply curves are usually considered marginal cost curves. But P0 represents the minimum supply to sell a given quantity. To sell more, you gotta pay me. Again, because cost generally increases as output increases. The law of supply just says the opposite of the law of demand. Higher prices, greater quantity; lower prices, less quantity. And think about us as being suppliers of labor. So all of us supply labor. If we are offered a higher wage, we'll generally work more. Right? That's how they get us to work overtime and those kinds of things, is by offering a higher wage, and they get to move us along our labor supply curve. So this is 40 hours a week, but yeah, I'll work more if you pay me more in terms of a higher hourly wage. All right. But we also, there's your minimum, or what's called the reservation price. So at any prices above this, you don't even enter the market. So I'm not going to supply anything. All right, so again, price, we're looking at movements along the supply curve, and supply is going to have shifters just like demand. One thing that's held constant along the supply curve is technology. So we can imagine an increase in technology makes things cheaper. It's going to shift the supply curve out so that for any given quantity, or I guess for any given price, we can sell more. Or for any given quantity, we can charge less. So technology has a price reducing effect. price of inputs are similar in terms of a decrease in the price of inputs, which shift out the supply curve and result in, again, lower prices or greater quantity at the same price. And the price of inputs is usually the one we're going to be concerned about the most. Price of related goods in production, substitutes, what the heck does that mean? Let me see, substitutes in production, two things that can be produced using the same resources. A lot of this comes from agriculture, but think about a piece of plot of land that can be used for growing wheat or growing corn. So if they're related goods in production, then if the price of, let's see, if the price of, if there's a decrease in the price of a substitute good, then you're going to supply less of that, and you're going to supply more of this good. You have complements in production, and usually with complements in production, you can think of these as byproducts. Goods that are produced through the natural production process of producing other goods. So scrap metal. All the things I just saw a video on cows, and what it said was that only 60% of a cow goes to food. The other 40% goes to producing tons of other things. Jet fuel, I guess how it has a cow product in it. Creams and lotions, lipsticks, all kinds of medications and drugs are used with cow byproducts, livers, and you don't even want to think about this stuff. It was kind of disgusting. Especially they showed a woman putting on lipstick and saying that lipstick uses all these cow byproducts that they don't use. So all those things, right, the more beef we eat, the cheaper lipstick's going to be. I'm not pointing just to you because I could use lipstick too. So you don't want to be sexist.
Halloween is tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah. So you know what I do on my Saturday nights. So as there's an increase in the price of complementary goods, again, we'll supply more of that stuff, and the primary good would shift out, and that would have price reducing effects. Or vice versa. Number of suppliers has competitive effects, so the more suppliers generally pushes prices down, and that's a good thing. Just like which is why we like to encourage suppliers. Yeah. And this was interesting. How has the internet affected prices? This was a quote from 1999 about how the internet was going to make force prices to fall to cost, and we're all going to be buying stuff dirt cheap. This is a paper by Mike Bay and a couple other guys. I know Mike Bay because he was at A&M at one point in time. And what they did is they went on this website called Shopper.com, looked at over 1,000 products, and what they found was that even on the internet, not all products have the same number of sellers. So products that had more sellers were cheaper, products that had fewer sellers had higher prices and a greater distribution of prices. So that was, I found that pretty interesting. Another, I just read this in, I don't know, wherever I read stuff, usually CNN and MSNBC. How has Uber affected taxi cab medallions? Medallions, you guys know what medallions are? The gold ones you wear to the clubs when I have my lipstick on. So yeah, to run a taxi, you have to have a medallion. There's only so many of them. How many? There's 13,000 medallions issued in New York City. In 2013-14, the price of a medallion was 1.3 million. So, and again, you only buy that because you expect to make that much money, that money back, plus some. So, you know, you had to come up with 1.3 million to drive a taxi. Seems like a lot of money. I mean, not that it seems like a lot of money. That is a lot of money. Ever since Uber has entered, the value of taxis, the value of a taxi has decreased, and now those medallions are going for about $250,000. So that's how big of an effect Uber has had on the taxi business. I took Uber for the first time just recently. Do you guys Uber? Is everybody Uber? Man, I know a guy that was going to sell his car and take Uber to work every day because it was cheaper. That's bizarre. That's insane.
I've heard of parents doing that with their kids instead of buying their kids cars. And
Oh,
school
and you're
stuff.
taking your kids to school.
Yeah, it's taking kids to school, yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause it's cheaper than buying them a car.
Yeah, that's insane. That's insane. Yeah, we went to, let's see, we took an Uber from the airport in San Jose to where we were staying, which is, I don't know, about 10 miles or so. It was $30 for 7 of us, I think, in a cab, in a big minivan. Compare that, we went to Cabo San Lucas, and apparently there's only one cab company there, and it's really, so they have literally have a monopoly. It was $150 to get from the hotel to the airport. There is no competition. So, yeah, the number of suppliers is a big deal. Technology, you know, people are now building houses, and they're not even living in them or renting them. They're just Airbnb them. You can make more on a weekend than you can having a regular monthly rental. So that's one of the things they're trying to get. So a lot of cities with housing shortages, like us, are trying to get rid of the whole Airbnbs. So they're putting a cap on them. If you've been approved as an Airbnb, you can keep it, but they're not going to let any more Airbnbs. They're not going to approve any more Airbnbs in the county or the city or whoever is doing it. I know in Glen Ellen, there's a couple houses that were brand new houses just built, and they're exclusively Airbnbs. It's just insane. But they can make that much money. It just doesn't make sense. My wife goes to the dog park to take our dogs to play, and there's a couple there that rents out their house as an Airbnb, and it's their house that they live in, and they'll go stay at a hotel or with friends because they make enough. So they actually, you know, on the weekends they'll just leave their own house, which is strange because you got your clothes in there and your.
Why don't they just place the same taxes they tax hotels on? It would make it unprofitable to be doing that. It's like, just make them, it's a business now, okay? You're treated like a business.
And this is all new technology. This is like, oh my God, what do we do? Yeah, it's strange. So, same thing with expected future price. If you expect the price in the future we expect a higher price in the future. You know, if you expect price to fall in the future, you're going to increase supply now to try to cash in on the higher price, and that'll shift out the supply. So the main thing we want to be familiar with is that these factors shift the supply curve out, and price causes movements along either the supply curve or the demand curve. So we have shifters, and then we have the price, which moves up and down. All right, let me get market equilibrium. Yeah, the price is low, so here's a price below equilibrium. Then we see kind of the respective sides of the market do what they do best. So suppliers, sellers don't like low prices, so they're going to supply less than the equilibrium quantity. Consumers, us, we like low prices, so we're going to buy more than the equilibrium quantity. That's going to result in a shortage. And when there's more people that want something and there is something available, that tends to have dynamic effects. People are going to do something. So how do suppliers allocate a scarce resource? So there's only this much supply of stuff, there's only this many, but there's this many people that want it. So you've got, this is your shortage here. So what happens? Well, they both start to kind of engage in dynamics. Consumers are going to offer higher prices. You know, I'll give you a little bit higher than this, and they'll start bidding amongst themselves. And sellers will offer to sell those to the highest bidder, and that tends to have upward pressure on prices until we get to equilibrium. The opposite's true. So an increase in demand will have the kind of same effect, where we have to have the dynamic effects there. All right. Anyway, just see that. All right. Let's do that. Mostly review? Yeah, sure. This is not review. This is the other half of what I said was mostly easy stuff. This is extremely technical, but again, it's endemic to what we do. Anything that involves econometrics is going to suffer from one of these things: endogeneity, identification, and simultaneity. So the question isn't, is there endogeneity, identification, and simultaneity? The question is, how severe is it? So it's one of those things, like I said, if I didn't teach this, I should be sued for malpractice. As we'll see, you just can't avoid it. And again, it requires, as technical as this is, it really requires us just having a sound understanding of supply and demand. So what the heck are we talking about? Here's a simple supply and demand model. There's a demand curve, there's a supply curve. So quantity demanded is a function of price, quantity supplied is a function of price. Here is a graphical representation of those prices. There's our equilibrium price and quantity. Pretty basic, straightforward stuff. All right. We're going to have shifters, right? We know price is determined in the market by the interaction of supply and demand, but supply and demand conditions are constantly changing. So here's a shift in demand, and here's a new equilibrium price and quantity. Here's a shift in supply, and here's a new equilibrium price and quantity. And another one could be, right, S1 and D0, which would intersect there. So let's just put that one in there.